This is Regin's Travels podcast. Welcome to Regin's Travels podcast. Joining us today is Mike Spencer Bown, who has been backpacking nonstop since 1990 and has visited all the world's countries and quasi-countries on all 7 continents. His adventures include being arrested more times than he can count, hitchhiking throughout countries in a state of war, and hunting with the Mabuti pygmy tribe in the Democratic Republic of Congo while evading genocidal Hutu rebels. Of the few people who have visited every country on Earth, Mike has been backpacking the longest, traveling light and living out of the same well-worn backpack. Though he calls no single place home, he was raised in Alberta, Canada. He is also an author. He wrote a book entitled The World's Most Traveled Man, which was published in 2017. Alright, great. So, hello Mike, how are you doing today?
Pretty good. It's a little bit rainy here in Kyiv, so I might be confined to the apartment. Normally I go down and walk on an island on the Dnipro River. There's like a sandy island down there, and I usually walk around and see how the frogs and turtles are doing. Or there's a beach club down there. Sometimes I go to that. But I think with the weather today, it'll be pretty much deserted.
Wow, so you really love nature. First of all, thank you so much for being here on the podcast.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, it's my pleasure. Yeah, I like to hang out in nature. You know, I've been watching my new discovery of this year is I found out where the turtles are living on the island. It's an island that used to be occupied by Ukrainian villages, but I think the Nazis destroyed it in World War II. So they went and wiped everything out because they wanted like a clean line of approach for artillery for trying to defend against the counterattack of the Soviet army. So they went and wiped out and shot the people on the island. So, you know, I guess the park itself exists on account of the Nazis. Otherwise, it'd just be a built-up part of the city. But anyway, it is a very nice park to hang out in, and I was able to discover where the turtles were living. And they have a couple beach clubs down there, so it's pretty fun just walking around.
Yeah. And you started traveling because of your fascination with nature. You started with going camping, going to the wilderness, exploring the wild, the nature of Canada. So I really think that you really love nature because that's where you started.
Yeah, I've spent years, like probably 5-6 years, if you add it all up, and what's the equivalent of camping. And some of it quite hardcore camping where 3 months might pass and I haven't seen a human or talked to another person of any kind. So I was doing that, a lot of it in Canada, some of it in Africa, some in Asia as well. Wow. Mostly in Canada because I was more familiar with that. But the Congo was good for it, and some of the Southeast Asian places were quite good to spend time in nature.
How was it camping alone though? I haven't tried it yet, but it seems like it's a pretty adventurous and exciting activity.
Oh yeah, it's very different than regular camping because you get there's actually 2 ways of being human. We have like a mode in our brain that's for when we're in the camp and we're around people, and most people are only aware of that mode. It's like the camp mode, and there's another mode when you're alone in the wilderness. And so there's like a flip side of how the human brain functions. And if you're there long enough, like you have to go at least more than 35 or maybe up to like 45 days completely alone with no speaking in a place where there's no human constructs around you to remind you of human nature. Well, then you flip into another mode where you become intensely aware of any animal around you and merge into the ecosystem. And if you're there long enough, you enter a kind of dream time that's similar to how the Aborigines of Australia would talk about it.
Wow. I didn't know that there's a difference.
No, I haven't done that in a while, but It was good fun. But I still like to remind myself of nature and spend a lot of time there. I find it quite relaxing. So, what I'm doing here, I'm kind of stuck in Kyiv now. So, I only managed to do 6 countries this year. And then it was just getting too hard too hard to travel because some of the Eastern European countries and Turkey and some other ones were just starting to make a lot of restrictions. So I think for this year, I started in Canada. I was visiting some friends there. And then I went to Ukraine. And then I went to Turkey and to Egypt for a while, which was good fun. And Egypt was easy now. They've got in Cairo, used to be one of the biggest troubles for getting around Cairo was constant fighting with the taxi drivers. But now they have Uber. So you just
Oh,
call Uber now, and you just go to where, like, instead of fighting for half an hour with every taxi driver you're with as they try to
right.
rip you off, you just get in the taxi, go to where you want to go, and get out.
Right,
So it's
right.
quite a change.
Yeah, I've seen this YouTube video of one of the travel vloggers. His name is Simon Wilson. So he was touring the world, visiting the seven wonders of the world in 7 days. So he went to
Oh wow.
Cairo to visit the pyramids, right? So that's what he did. He took an Uber, and I think that's really a huge for us travelers. That's like a huge step in terms of dealing with scammers and especially these taxi drivers.
Yeah, they used to be one of the one of the worst parts of traveling was dealing with taxi drivers. Sometimes I'd walk 10 kilometers with my backpack just to avoid them because they
Oh,
used to be particularly bad in India a long time ago. I mean, they're probably not as bad now,
mm-hmm.
but it used to be that it could take you hours to get to the hotel you want to go to because they were just insisting on bringing you to a hotel where they have commission.
Mm.
And in fact, one of my friends had his life saved though because of that. He was in Cambodia when it first opened up, and
Uh-huh.
he went to Sihanoukville, and
Yeah.
there was a corrupt taxi driver wouldn't take him to the hotel he wanted to go to, and instead was taking him to a different hotel where the guy had commission. And he was so tired from all this stress of moving through Cambodia that he thought he would just allow himself to be ripped off this one time. So he
Uh-huh.
went to the hotel he didn't want to go to instead of the one he had the reservation at. But
Uh-huh.
then the next day, when he went to see the hotel, move into the hotel where he had the reservation, he saw it was closed and there was police and army all around it because guys
Oh.
had come in with AKs and they blasted dead everyone on every floor of the hotel. And that was the very night that
Oh.
he was supposed to be sleeping there. But that's a rare instance where he was saved by the scammers. Usually the scammers are just annoying.
Right,
And
right.
in the
But
city of Jhansi, mm-hmm.
yeah, but the
Yeah,
thing
city
is,
of Jhansi, there was taxi drivers pretending they couldn't even pronounce the name Jhansi because I wanted to go to the Jhansi hotel,
what is
and they were
that?
saying, "Oh, Jinsi, Ginsi," like they're pretending they couldn't pronounce the name of their own town, which is the name of the hotel.
Oh, where is that? Which country is that?
In India.
I
Yeah, this
see.
was back in the 90s in India.
Right, but
Yeah,
that
but
that
India's improving quite a lot. I mean, like recent times I've been to India, they're not like people aren't punching each other in the face over seats on the bus anymore. Like instead, they're just getting tickets and then sitting in the seat normally. So I think they've made a lot of improvements.
yeah, I've heard about the trains in India as well, where it's so cramped. But I think it's part of the experience of traveling. It's not always
Yeah,
comfortable.
well, back then maybe it was too much experience because I was on one train in southern India, and people swarmed in, and they even came into the cabins and they like pushed children out of bed so that they could all sleep there. So like a little boy whose parents bought him a sleeper bunk would find there was 3 or 4 men in the bed with him, and they were sleeping all through the hallways. And if you had to go and take a piss, which sometimes happens, you had to get up to this train that was lurching along the railroad track, and you had to step between all these sleeping bodies all the way down the corridor. And then in the toilet, it was completely filled with people sleeping on the ground as well, with their faces like right near the hole in the metal that you're supposed to piss through. So you had to like very carefully piss through the hole and hope not to piss on all these Indians that are sleeping around there while the train is lurching and almost coming off the track as it's going around certain bends.
Wow.
Yeah, no,
Oh,
that's a very
interesting.
like low level of customer service, but I'm sure they've improved it by now. That was like what 25 years ago or something like that.
Yeah. But then you were living in Canada. You're from Canada, and you've opted to travel the world since 1990. In the beginning, you
Yeah,
were like what I've mentioned. You started with camping in the wilderness, but by yourself,
yeah.
enjoying the nature, and then you decided to venture out and travel the world, and you haven't stopped since then, since the 1990. Wow! Can you tell us more
Yeah,
about
so
this?
it's
Like, how did this all start? It's
well,
a long
I
time, 30 years, right? 30 years.
it actually just started while I was camping. So, I was up on a hillside in British Columbia, and it was quite a hot summer day, and I was looking out over these lakes and hills in the distance. And it just got me to think, I wonder, like, you can kind of almost imagine the curve of the earth when you're high up like that. And I thought, wow, it's a pretty big planet we're on. And I thought, I wonder if it's possible, like even possible to go and try to see everything. And I'd never heard of anyone trying to do it. There wasn't very much internet back then or anything. So there wasn't like a lot of talk about travel. And I thought, I think I want to try to do this. And at first I was just wanted to see all the different ecosystems. Like I wanted to see all the different mountain ranges and rivers and things like that. But then I became more interested in people and cultures as I was moving along. So, eventually it ended up being a mix of all that I wanted to see. And at the end of seeing like everything that I thought was interesting, it turned out that I'd also visited all the countries.
So aren't you scared though in the beginning? Because like what you've mentioned, there was no internet, you don't know what's out there, what's in there, and I remember during the time travel was not yet very common, and a lot of people are scared to travel, especially
Well, it
from
was
the
a
west to go
different
to
kind of
Asia.
travel. Yeah. Yeah, I know, and maybe for good reason. Some of the Asian countries were quite dangerous.
Hmm.
So, like even in Laos, for instance, there was people that I met who just got shot or killed. Like there was a lot of casualties associated with doing some of these countries. Like Asia used to be as rowdy as what Africa is now.
Right in the 90s, I remember. Like
Yeah,
especially
yeah, there was a lot of problems.
yeah, especially Southeast Asia, Indochina countries, they were still they just finished war, I think in the 1970s, like with the Vietnam War and all that stuff, Cambodia and Laos. And yeah,
Yeah,
you were so brave in doing that, just
yeah, and,
leaving
and even
Canada
for
and
the
traveling the
Philippines.
world.
So, for instance, for the Philippines, I went there during the '90s, and there was or maybe it was around 2000. Anyway, I can't quite remember exactly when it was, but there was the national airline had gone bankrupt.
Yeah, I
So
remember that.
yeah, yeah, and
Philippine
then also
Airlines.
there was when I was in Palawan, there had just been some sort of terrorist attack, and some people were kidnapped. Some
Oh,
travelers were, I think, Americans or something. I think one of them had his head cut off. And then when I was riding on the jeepneys in Palawan, you had to have armed guards on top of them. There was a lot of potential trouble. So yeah, it was a little even for the Philippines, which is relatively safe. There was some problems back then.
right, right. That's what I'm saying. It's like you're so brave to do all of this. So what do you think is the what's your fascination despite of all the dangers and the fear of the people during that time you still decided to really venture out there and go out there and travel?
Well, I considered it less dangerous than what I was doing with the wilderness. So
Okay.
for instance, when I was living alone in the wilderness, I had like constant trouble with bears, and a mountain lion tried to kill me. I almost starved to death a couple times. So, I had like when sometimes I would get sick from the water, and then it was hard to
Hmm.
get to gather enough food or to catch enough fish. So, it was very dangerous there. And even like I would be climbing on cliffs alone, and if I fell, I'd be killed. So there was a lot of potential risk. So one of the first countries I went to was Nicaragua or just after the war. And a lot of
Wow.
people were quite scared to go there, but I felt that it was actually a step down in terms of the risk I was taking. Like as long as you pay attention to the environment around you and what's going on, I think that travel is not as risky as living alone in the wilderness.
So how was
So
South?
from that point of view, I considered that I was just taking a little bit of a break and you know deciding to have a bit more a risk-free life. Now, that even included places like, I went to Iraq during the war. I went to Afghanistan in 2008. I went into the Central Mountains and things like that.
Hmm.
So, there's a lot of, I took a lot of risks, it's true. But I think it was worth it. Even these countries that were at war, they were quite fun. And it is possible to get through them. There's like a network of people that are kind of friendly, other people that are friendly. And if you just listen to them, you can kind of move through all these danger zones without suffering too much trouble.
So what made you really decide to do this full time? Because for most people, travel is just a vacation, a break from work to recharge and enjoy out there. But you decided to do this full time and even for a long time without stopping.
Well, I found a way in which I only had to work for about a month a year. So I had lots of free time, and it involved traveling. So what it was is back in the '90s, or even until relatively recently, the banking system wasn't so good around the world.
Hmm.
Like let's say you went to Burma, a long time ago, and you wanted to buy rubies. You couldn't just use the banks there. You could try to get money wired in, but the people at the bank might try to steal it. This even happened to some guys I was talking to. So there's all these risks with trying to move money around. And what I realized is if I just had like, I used to carry this little blue bag. I still have it. It's 30 years old now. It's kind of ripped up, but I used
Whoa.
to just carry it full of cash, like $100 bills, American bills. And this was like my business float. And I would see business opportunities that other people can't take advantage of because there was no way to get the money to take advantage of it. So in the local area, there wouldn't be much money. So as a result, something might be relatively low cost because there's not a lot of money to bid up the cost of it. But foreigners who are coming through who might have money, they can't have access to their money. And there's very few of them anyway because they're afraid to go there.
Hmm.
So I would just see opportunities for things that I could buy, and then I would just resell it somewhere else. So from about a month of work a year, I could fully support my travel and even more. Make a good profit.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
interesting.
Now that opportunity's gone now, but because now the banking's excellent everywhere. Like even here in Ukraine, I just use it. I just use credit cards. I don't carry cash anymore. There's no reason for it.
Yeah, that's what I thought. It's like it's dangerous really carrying that thing, just in your bag
Yeah. So
traveling
it was a
around.
big risk. Yeah. Like even when I was hitchhiking through Iraq during the Operation Iron Grip phase of the Gulf War, I
Hmm.
had in my bag probably about $80,000. It was at least 50. I think I started with 100. And I was using some for business, so I probably had at least 50 and maybe around $80,000 in my bag. And I was going to these areas where people were shooting at each other, there's helicopters overhead, and all kind of things going on. But no one suspects, if you just dress like kind of you dress not in a rich way, like just kind of average way, and your clothes look kind of dirty and just normal, no one would suspect that you have a bag with like 100 grand in it or 200 grand.
Wow, and you even went to Iraq during that time. So did you
Yeah.
purposely go to these dangerous places during that time? Because you've mentioned, you went to Iraq, to Nicaragua, to Southeast Asia, which during the time were deemed dangerous countries. So was that deliberate?
I would say I just, if it was nearby, I would just go to it, whether they had war or not. So for me, the biggest risk was trying to get these visas. It's very hard to get visas. I'm not sure if it's any easier now because I haven't tried a really difficult visa country lately. But for some like Iraq was, well, Iraq I bribed my way in. So with one Jordanian dinar, I bribed my way into it. But some of these countries are quite hard to get a visa to. Even for Afghanistan in 2008, it took me a week maybe or maybe more to get the visa. And I've
Hmm.
had some that, I spent years working on the visa before finally getting it. So I had more trouble with that. I wasn't thinking so much about the danger of the country because
Mm.
I knew I could handle that. You just take local advice and you got to also know when to ignore local advice. And I found them to be very doable.
So how?
Somalia, for instance, they only had the airport under government control at that time. And I think one of the highways and the presidential palace, and there's a few hotels around that. So when I arrived there, it's like the airport was a fortress and there was no entrance to the airport. They had like these giant concrete slabs that were plugging up the fortified airport. And if you wanted to leave the airport, like they'd wait till a bunch of people wanted to leave at once. And then forklifts would come and lift up the concrete fortifications. Then you kind of go out there and they'd put them back.
Whoa.
And the hotel I was in had a whole bunch of soldiers on the roof and in the lobby
When was
because they'd
this?
been attacked before. This, I can't remember quite when it was. It might have been, maybe it was 2010 or 11. It was at a time when the government control in Somalia was quite limited. I'm
Hmm.
not sure I think it's a little bit better now because I'm seeing online like more people getting in and doing it.
Right. And you were the first tourist. I've read you were the first tourist in Somalia.
Yeah, yeah. I think I might have been the first tourist because the other people were going there for some sort of like was the occasional traveler going there who was not a Somali. So if you were a Somali, you could come and go no problem. And I even talked to some Somalis who even went into areas controlled by insurgent groups, and it wasn't a problem as long as they're a Somali person. But there were a few other travelers there, but they were like they worked for the CIA or they sold weapons or they sold some sort of materials associated with the African Union mission, that kind of thing. They were there for business reasons. They generally kept a very low profile. So I think I
Mhm.
might have been the first since they followed that government to go there just for tourism.
Yeah, and you've mentioned when you were there, you had bodyguards, you had the army, even in your hotel, in your car.
Yeah, it was very safe. It was unavoidable bodyguards. So when I arrived, like they wouldn't let me stay there unless I went to a particular hotel that was. I think there was only 3 or 4 hotels that were open anyway, but one of them was known to have quite a lot of guards. I think they had 65 guards, and so the guy who let me into the country, I'm not sure what his position was, but he insisted that I stay in this hotel that had a lot of guards. So I felt very safe there anyway. But the hotel manager said that I shouldn't be standing on the roof because there were snipers who would shoot anyone in that situation because they didn't control much of the city back then.
Yeah. So,
But they had a lot of weapons around. Like we had access to rocket-propelled grenades and machine guns, all kind of things.
so as a tourist, do they provide these guards automatically, or do you have to pay for them?
It was expensive there. I think I was paying $100 a night.
No, for
So
I
I
mean
think that
for the
the
guards.
security cost was, yeah,
Jesus.
$100 a night. And I think the security cost was wrapped
Wow.
up in that cost.
Oh
Yes,
wow.
luckily I lucky to have the cash on me because there's no no banking, of course.
So what did you do there during that time in Somalia? It was a tumultuous time, and what were the activities there as a tourist?
Well, not as good as what the activities are now. So for instance, I had to go everywhere accompanied by guards,
Hmm.
and for traveling through certain parts of the city, I was in a car which was armored and had the windows were blacked out, so you couldn't see who was inside of it, with a bunch of guards. And now you can do more exciting things. So in the Mogadishu part of it, I couldn't do a lot because they didn't control the city really. They didn't even
Mm.
control the beach, I don't think. So I couldn't do very much in Mogadishu. I was just like talking to Somalis who were there, and I saw a few buildings, but they didn't really own much. But other parts of Somalia, like Puntland, I was able to get around there, and the Puntland government gave me a tour. But they also insisted I go with like an armored convoy, but they provided this for free. They were
How
quite
about
nice guys, actually. At first, they threw me into like a detention, like a sort of almost what was equivalent to a prison, like I couldn't leave. But
Mhm.
then they talked to me for a while and decided I was just a traveler. So they decided to make me a guest of the government. So I got to go to various restaurants and talk to the ministers and, you know, go around and see things. It was quite fun. And of course, Somaliland, that's easy to go to. I mean, you can just go there. And I think you at the time you had to pay for only one armed guard, and you
Mm.
could travel around and go to the seaside and all that.
So you're also able to go to Somaliland during the time.
Yeah, Somaliland's easy to go to. Puntland
Wow.
was quite difficult, and Mogadishu was also quite difficult.
Oh, okay. Whoa.
Yeah, and I
And
think they might have had another split. They might have another area kind of split off right now. They're fighting a lot over wood for charcoal. I think at the moment that might be old. That might be from a couple of years ago. But they were very, one of the ways to make money in Somalia is to burn the wood and turn it to charcoal. You can make a little bit of profit from that. And I think there might be some factions that are trying to carve out areas where they're interested in that line of business.
where do they sell those charcoal?
I think they would probably take it down to maybe to Kenya or Tanzania or
Oh,
someplace
okay.
like that.
Mm.
Yeah, so it's not a very profitable business, but it's like one of the only businesses you can do that.
Hmm.
There's that, and they might be trying to get back into fishing, somewhat. It's a difficult place to make a living, actually.
And you've been to a lot of countries. Actually, in fact, you've been to all of the countries in the world. So
Yeah,
when did you able to finish all the countries? You started in 1990. When
I
did you
think it
able to
might have
finish?
been 2013. Like it might have been 7 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, when I
Okay.
finally finished. It took 23 years to see all the countries, and then since then I've just been like going back to various places that I kind of like and seeing them again. Like even for Egypt, I think it was my third or fourth time to Egypt when I went there this year.
So what are your favorite countries by far?
Well, I kind of like I like some of these unusual countries. Like I like um, let me think. Well, I like Congo a lot, like deep in the Congo forest. I
Whoa.
liked Solomon Islands. Not many people go there. There were some very interesting islands there where they were former cannibal tribes, but they're quite civilized now. But you still have to be a little bit careful. The highlands of Papua New Guinea were quite fun. They have a very unique culture.
So we're,
Mozambique was quite fun in the north along the beaches there. Yeah, so some of these countries that not too many people go to, I sort of like. And here in Ukraine, I like it too, even though I'm kind of stuck here because it's getting a little bit hard to travel. So I'm just here. I'm actually doing some Duolingo Russian studies. So I knew a little bit of Russian from before when I had a Kazakh girlfriend. So I'm trying to, complete that Russian study since I'm stuck here anyway for a month or two. So,
yeah, I think it's really good. It's really a different feeling to be in a country where there are not a lot of tourists. It's a different experience. I remember my time when I went to Mongolia. I was the only tourist during that time because we went to the countryside, not really in the capital city. And during the time in that particular place, I was the only tourist, and it's really a different feeling compared to if you go to a
yeah,
touristy place. So I can understand why you like to be in these countries. And some
yeah.
people don't
Well,
understand because they think, oh, the popular destinations are, Singapore, Hong Kong, the US, like these famous places. But some people just want to be in a place where there's not a lot of tourists, and you can have a different experience, kind of like being in a different planet.
Yeah. So when I went to Mongolia, I went to the Altai Mountains, and there I could rent a horse and a yurt for $20 a day. And so I just spent a couple of weeks just riding around on a horse. I'd go sometimes 50 or 80 kilometers, and I'd find all these interesting things. Like I noticed this one valley, like one of these glaciated valleys, so it has very smooth. It's been carved by the glacier, so it's got very smooth sides to the valley. And in the distance, there seemed to be some flags flying and what looked like Russian-made trucks. I thought, oh, okay, kind of cool. So I rode my horse over there, and it took half the day to reach it. And then once I reached there, there was this, really elderly Frenchman with a bunch of young Mongolians. And he said, oh, you must be the National Geographic photographer. I said, okay, get ready. We're going to open up the Bronze Age Scythian tomb. And I said, no, actually, I'm not the National Geographic photographer. I'm going, what? Well, what are you doing here then? I said, oh, I'm just living here in a yurt, and I just saw your flags in the distance and rode over on my horse. And he said, okay, well, since you're here anyway, you might as well watch us open up the Bronze Age tomb.
Oh, wow.
So I got that, opportunity to hang out and see them doing something interesting. And even then, like, you come to a river while riding your horse, you could get the horse to swim across the river and just keep riding on the other side.
Really? It's like kind of
so
like a
it was
boat.
Great fun. Like, I hadn't experienced that much horse riding before. So it was, and also, Mongolia is famous for horse riding. So it's so much fun to be able to do that.
Wow. I think that's really a very wonderful experience because, knowing Mongolia, it's a vast land and sparsely populated. So it's like you have all the place to yourself with the grassland especially, and just you're on a horse. So that is like the ultimate definition of freedom. You can just go wherever you want. There are no fences, and you're amidst nature, fresh air. That's like an adventure, an ultimate adventure.
Yeah, and I finally got to use the medical kit I've been carrying with me all these years. I never really used it.
What happened?
But when I was in Mongolia, like in the middle of the night, there was someone knocking at my yurt. And I'm like, oh, what's this? And it turned out there was this Mongolian with a serious injury to his leg. It was really torn open. And it looked like the muscle looked like two pieces of chicken almost. It was so much cut open. And they'd heard I was a foreigner, and they were hoping that I had some medical skill. And I said, well, actually, I don't have any medical skill, but I do have a medical kit. And I said, well, what did you do for this injury? And they were saying, well, we poured some vodka on it. And so then, okay, well, that's good. So it turned out that I had some bandages and I had some other things to try to push it closed. And I don't have any skill with sewing stuff up, so I couldn't try to suture it. But I pushed together the pieces of muscle, and I was able to use bandage to try to stick it together. And then I asked the Mongolian, if he wanted some painkiller pills, because these were in the kit as well. Now, I'd actually never used painkiller pills before in my life either, but I had them there. And he goes, what? No, pills against pain. I don't need that. I'm a Mongolian. I'm like, okay, cool. Wow. And later I talked to someone who knew something about medicine. He goes, yeah, that's the best you could have done. So that's probably good. Because I used some of my own antiseptic I had in that kit, and probably his leg would be fixed.
So during all these times, you were traveling solo?
Sometimes solo, sometimes with a girlfriend, or sometimes I meet a bunch of people. Like when I did Colombia, there was like 7 or 8 of us who were all travelers, and we sort of came together into one group and go out and do things. So it all depends. Like by not having a plan, you can sort of just go along with whatever seems fun at the time.
Right.
And it makes it so much easier. So sometimes it's very social. Like before, when I've come to Kiev, there was a whole bunch of people I knew here, because there was a lot of travelers back then. So sometimes I would even recognize people on the street, and it would get quite social. We'd all go to the beach club. But now, because of COVID, there's not so many here. So anyway, it's good for my concentration. I can study some Russian.
So how do you feel traveling solo? Because not a lot of people have experienced it, and some people find it to be, a lonely travel style because you're alone. So how about you? How do you feel about this, traveling mostly solo?
I think when you travel solo, it's the opposite of alone, because you're solo, you kind of meet other travelers who are also solo, and then you end up forming a group. So, I find the most solo you get is if you're traveling, let's say, with just another person. Then sometimes you're getting your social, your required social contact you get from this other person. And then maybe you make less effort to stay in hostels and talk to other people who are there. Whereas if you travel alone, you often end up in, groups of 4 or 5 people.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't really encounter it that much. But for some countries, though, you do end up alone. Like some countries, no one will go to. So
Like
you end
Iraq.
up being the only person there. Yeah. Like I think what I did, what was it? Chad. There was no other travelers.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah, I remember. I would just hitch rides on the back of dump trucks. I mean, like go along through the night and reach these oases in the middle of nowhere. And they didn't even know how to accommodate a tourist. Like usually I'd sleep on concrete floor of some building that only got half constructed. And, try to make a little shelter by getting 2 of those plastic chairs you see all around the world. I think they come from China. Then I'd like throw a mosquito net over it and I'd just sleep between the 2 chairs on the concrete out in the night.
Wow, that's really an adventurous life. Because before, I was backpacking. I was sometimes sleep at the airport, and there was one time I slept at a bus terminal in Myanmar. So I thought that was already an adventurous kind of traveling. But now hearing your stories, you're sleeping on the roads, you're hitchhiking. I was like, whoa, this is this is
Yeah.
on a different level
Yeah,
of
I
travel
hitchhiked to a
style.
lot of. I even hitchhiked to the Congo, which a lot of people said wasn't possible. But it's very uncomfortable because you're riding in the back of trucks just bouncing along these very bad roads, and sometimes a lot of insurgents or militaristic groups want to hitchhike as well. So sometimes your truck is just bristling with weapons, and then sometimes you're just alone for days. Like there's one time I hitched a ride for several days, and at the end the driver only wanted $20 to help with his gas. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
So, of all your travels, what do you think are the really dangerous moments that you've encountered?
Hmm. They're not so. I don't know. I mean, like for instance, in central Afghanistan, there was a road where people told me there was a 30% chance I'd be killed because the Taliban were stopping people on the road and they were killing anyone who couldn't speak Pashtun.
Wow.
So even if you were an Afghan, they would kill you if you couldn't speak their tribal language. But
Whoa.
I took that road,
What
and
happened?
that was fine.
Did they stop
Yeah.
you?
So no, I didn't get stopped by them. So I was assuming that maybe they were overestimating that 30%.
Okay.
Because I heard several people tell me the same thing. So I asked a lot of locals and they all said 30% exactly. And I thought, oh, they must have heard this from the news. And I know the news tends to exaggerate things. So I was thinking it's probably more like 5%. So yeah, I took the road there and back. It was pretty fun going through the mountains, and I could see lots of destroyed Russian military equipment. There were minefields. At one point, the road was so bad. Like I've only seen a equally bad road in northern Kenya on the trip to over the Blue Mountain to Lake Turkana. That was a pretty bad road. But this one
Mhm.
through the Central Mountains, it was just a terrible road. And it tore the wheel off our van, off our four-wheel drive van. And I could see the wheel come off, through the window of the van. And we're skidding to a halt. And all the Afghans in with me don't know what's going on. But I can see the wheel, going up the mountain. So it just came off and it was heading up into the mountain. I'm like, oh no, who has to get the wheel? Because who wants to walk through minefields looking for a wheel? But then, just as we skidded to a stop, the wheel reached the top of a hill and turned around and rolled back down. And then it came to a halt exactly beside where it had fallen off.
Whoa. It's like a
So we
miracle.
just got out and put the wheel back on in a very crude way and continued to go along until finally we got to, what was it, Bamayan was our first stop. And there was a guy in the van with me who was asking me, like, you probably don't have a place to sleep and there's no accommodations. But, you can sleep at my uncle's. And I was like, okay. So it turned out his uncle lived up on a platform where you climb a ladder or like a steep stair.
Mhm.
There's a platform with a whole bunch of Afghan guys sitting around on carpets. And they were saying, do you want some food? And I'm like, okay, good. Yeah, sure, I'll have some. And they brought me out a silver platter with the knee of a camel on it. And I was looking at this knee and it was just like bone and cartilage with a bit of camel skin.
Mhm.
And I was like, I don't really eat camel knees. Like, do you have something like soup? Because I didn't even know what to eat on it. It just like, maybe it was a delicacy. I'm not sure. There didn't seem like there was any meat on it. It just looked like bone and cartilage and camel skin. But yeah, he brought me some soup. And then I was saying, so where should I sleep? And he said, oh yeah, there's a carpet over there. Just sleep on the carpet. So, and I said, what's the toilet facilities? He goes, yeah, we just go down this ladder and then we just piss in the alley and come back up. And I thought, okay. So, quite often I'd end up with accommodation like that. But it's funny you mentioning like sleeping in the airport. I had one time I slept in the airport for a week, and
Wow.
oddly enough, this was in Brisbane in Australia. So I'd arrived in Brisbane, and they have a facility there. It's almost like in Northern Europe, like in Sweden and places where they have a facility that can assist you to get a place to stay. And I went to them and I'm like, okay, what kind of places to stay do you have? And the guy was like, nothing whatsoever. And I was like, oh no, why is that? He said, there's like a big music festival and the place is absolutely booked solid. There's not a hostel room. There's not a campground room. There's nothing. And I thought, okay, well, I guess I'll just sleep in the airport. So I just found a place where there wasn't too much PA, calls coming over the airport. And I just slept there on the floor. And then I put my backpack into storage and I just took the train into town and went and did stuff. And I just come back to the airport and sleep. And after 3 or 4 days, actually hotels opened up. But I thought, you know what? It's free here. So I'm just going to keep sleeping in the airport.
So where did you eat during that time? Because at the airport, the restaurants are so expensive.
Oh, I would just go get food and like I would take the train. I think it was like $10 to take the train to the city. So I was paying some money. But I would just
Oh,
get something in Brisbane itself. And I just spent all day in Brisbane walking around. And I just had my backpack in a locker at the airport. Then I just go sleep on the floor. Like
oh,
I found a
wow.
place. And actually, after a few days, one of the guards who thought I was some sort of homeless guy, which in a way I was, he told me about a more comfy place that I could sleep. It was more out of the way.
Mm.
So overall, it was a pretty good experience.
Yeah, these travel experiences are the ones that you remember. Not really the comfortable ones.
But I remember things like that.
Yeah.
And not so much fancy restaurants or things. I occasionally go to these sort of things that most tourists would go to, but I don't really remember them.
So are you into food as well? Do you travel because of the food? You want to experience the cuisine of other countries? Are you particular about that?
I just eat whatever is local for where I am. So now that I'm in Kiev, I'm having their Ukrainian style food. So it's a lot of borscht, which is that cabbage soup with beets sometimes in it and sour cream that they put in. So I'm just eating that, and it makes things a lot cheaper. If you eat what the locals eat, it's a lot cheaper. But if you go to a place and you insist on the food you're used to at home, then you pay too much money.
Right, right.
So like when I'm in South America, I'll eat if they're having rice and beans, then I have rice and beans, whatever the people are eating. And if there's
Mm,
some kind of local delicacy, I'll try that too.
right. Do you have any particular favorite though that really stuck in
For
your mind?
favorite foods,
Yeah, favorite food of a particular country.
well, I found the oysters were very nice in Namibia.
Hmm.
So they had a particular bay where there's extremely high quality oysters there. They were pretty tasty. I like the barracuda soup that I had. It was like a curry barracuda soup that I had in Indonesia once. And
Oh,
in terms of cuisines, you know, Ethiopia has a very interesting cuisine for Africa. It's like I think for the best for Africa, it's probably Ethiopia and Morocco, probably the best. There's some other ones that are a little bit good, but I think those are probably the tops for Morocco. South American food, it's a little bit harder to get good food because sometimes they over specialize. Like for instance, if you're in Argentina, you better like steak and potatoes, and they make very good steak and potatoes. But that's pretty much that's
that's
pretty
pretty
much
much
all
it.
you're going to be eating.
Wow. Wow, you really. And how about North Korea? When did you go there?
Well, North Korea is a package tour. So I when did I go there? Might have been maybe it was 2009 or 10 or something. It was a while ago, maybe 10 years ago. And the way to do that is there's a Englishman who I think he's friends with a dictator or he knows some people in the North Korean government. So he runs something called Koryo Tours, I think is the name of it. And you can find it in Beijing. So you go near the place where people party, like near the street with the bars. There's this building, I think it says Koryo Tours on it. And if you go in there and talk to him, or talk to one of his assistants, you can pay money to go on what's essentially a package tour. And that's a package tour in the sense that there's someone from the North Korean government who accompanies you. So your group of, let's say it's 5 or 6 people, you'll be put in with other travelers. You'll have, in my case, I had a woman whose brother worked on the North Korean atomic project. So she was considered especially loyal to the regime. So she was assigned to sort of pay attention to everyone and make sure we're not acting inappropriately or, in a way spying. You're not allowed to just go do what you want there.
But
So, but it was still fun. We went around and saw various monuments. Drank their North Korean liquor at night. So it was a good thing. I think the highlight of that is I saw a flood where it was threatening to destroy a bridge. So there was a whole bunch of North Korean soldiers, and several of them were playing accordions on the shore of the river, and the rest of them had taken off their shirts, and they were all like carrying sandbags, and they were making like a line into the river where they were passing sandbags while they were singing patriotic, like communist style songs while the accordions are playing. And I thought, okay, that's a very classic image of what North Korea was, intending to be all about, that whole Stalinist socialist thing they have going on there.
but were you surprised though that North Korea is not as dangerous as most people think?
Well, I think it's not dangerous at all for the tourists because you're being watched by the government the whole time.
Right.
So I think unless you're like, I wouldn't recommend going to North Korea if you're the kind of person who has poor control of his own behavior. Like I have some friends, for instance, that I met at parties and things in England where they're quite impulsive. Like, for instance, there's one guy who's a very nice guy, but he's very impulsive. And so, we could see that, I said to him, like, oh, it looks like the security guards are looking at you because you're getting a bit too drunk. And he goes, oh, they're looking at me, are they? So he grabs a bar stool and he throws it and it hits the wall. And it's just because he's impulsive. So he had to do something to show he didn't care that the security guards were looking at him. So, of course, then they grab him and they throw him out of the bar. So if you're a guy like that, I think don't go to North Korea because there'll be a lot of circumstances where if you act impulsively, you could get yourself in trouble.
Right.
But if you're, quite a normal person, you have control over your own behavior, then you can just go there and just do the normal things. Look around, eat in restaurants, all that.
One of my favorite regions in the world to travel to, which I haven't been to yet, are the stun countries. I think I'm really fascinated by this region of the world, Central Asia or the stun countries. So tell me your experience there, especially countries like Turkmenistan and Tajikistan. How was your experience in these countries?
Well, I had lots of fun there, but I also ended up getting a girlfriend in Kazakhstan. And so that was very helpful because she had a lot of local contacts. So, I noticed that other people were having a lot of trouble with visas. I don't know what the situation is now, but it used to be a lot of trouble to get visas. And for instance, there was one the hostel I was in where there's a guy there waiting. I think it was for a visa for Uzbekistan. And he'd been waiting. And I said, how long have you been waiting for the visa? And he said, see those persimmons growing on that tree? And I go, yeah, they're almost ready to eat. And he said, well, there was no fruit on the tree when I started the process. So he's been waiting, he's working for many weeks or even months on these visas. They were just horrendous. But I really got good at the visa process. Like, for instance, I used to, what did I do for my Uzbek visa? I got it within a couple days. But what I did is I went into the UN headquarters and they gave me like a little plastic name tag with my name on it. And I had a document showing I was an economic advisor to the United Nations, even though I wasn't. And then I went into their room, their sort of boiler room where they have experts getting visas for their internal transportation of UN. And I said, yeah, I'm here doing the economic advice for the United Nations. And they can see I have this little name tag and I had some documents. And I need to be able to get into Uzbekistan now. And we were, oh, yeah, we can work on that. And then like a couple of days later, I had the visa. Ching, ching. So sometimes getting visas involved a little bit of dodgy practice, but it was the only way to get them.
So how about Turkmenistan? How was your experience in that country? Because I heard that it is being run by a dictator sort of thing. So how is it like to be a tourist there?
Okay, well, to get in there, they wanted so many passport photos. I was just joking with them saying, what do you paper your walls with these things? Like, I think they wanted 12 passport photos for the application. And I used a company called Stan Tours to assist with the process because it was just getting too difficult. And for them, they insist also that you have someone with you, but he doesn't have to necessarily be for the government. So in my case, he was a guy who was a former soldier, a former Russian soldier. And he picked me up at the border of Afghanistan. And so I crossed actually through Herat. And then I hitchhiked north from Herat until I reached the border. And then when I was crossing into Turkmenistan, it was quite funny because there was the guard who was meant to interrogate and make sure I wasn't a terrorist or whatever. She was actually a pretty young woman. And she was looking at me like, what's this guy doing traveling? And she was asking all these questions about my lifestyle. while she was going through my bag, and they went through they looked at every aspect of the bag. They spent like an hour looking at it. There was nothing in it untoward, but she kept asking me questions about, how I was living. Did I have a wife and family? Did I have a home? And I'm like, no, to all these things. And finally she lets me in, but she says, stop traveling, find a girlfriend, then get married and have kids. And I said, yes, ma'am. I gave her a salute. I'll get right on that. And finally she let me into Afghanistan, or from Afghanistan into Turkmenistan. And then when I meet the Russian guy who was going to be my tour guide, so you had to have a tour guide with you, he was apologizing, saying, I'm sorry it was so difficult to get through this border. And I said, no, you don't have to apologize. If Canada had a border with Afghanistan, I'm sure we'd also have a very lengthy procedure for trying to cross that border.
For sure.
Yeah, and then going around there was like, you could see how the dictator had made, he'd made like Ashgabat. He'd built it in such a way where he insisted on Italian white marble on all the buildings. And I could even see them chipping off this perfectly good gray marble on a building because he wanted to be like Italian white marble on all the buildings. So this was an unnecessary expense. And also you could see that everything had been made to look fantastic if you were a guy in a limousine driving along. So it was actually for his own personal. Yeah. So all the money he'd spent were on the kind of monuments that you could see from a limousine on the sorts of highways you travel along if you were like the leader in a limousine going around. So he had quite an ego. I think he was just a bureaucrat before he became the leader of the country. Then he went a bit nuts. So he opened mosques where instead of having like holy Quranic verses on the walls of the mosque, he would have verses from his own book that he'd written. And he was trying to pretend this book was as important as the Quran. So he's an interesting guy anyway. But I think he's been out of power a while. I think his former dentist is the new dictator.
So all the time when you were there exploring the place, you're always with a guide, kind of like in North Korea. Very similar.
Yeah. So and I think this is a requirement as well. So I didn't meet anyone else who didn't have a guide. And there were all these giant hotels where you'd be like the only person in it. So sometimes you're on your own. But for getting around, they didn't want you driving on your own. You had to have a guide who's driving you. But the guy I was with, he was quite good. I mean, he showed me some Bronze Age archaeological sites where I was finding like interesting things like old pottery with triangular fertility symbols from 10,000 years ago, spindles from, early Bronze Age civilizations, things like that. I found like some shark teeth from the former Tethys Sea before the rise of the mountains. So there are a lot of interesting things to see. Went camping and living out in the Yankala Valley. Yeah, there's a lot to do there. It's fun.
So going back to the advice of the lady who inspected you at the border, when did you decide to have this lifestyle? Not settling down compared to what society dictates, just living your life, traveling, not having your own family. When did you decide that you're gonna pursue this?
I think it just happened to me more. So I just started traveling, and then traveling doesn't really, if you're always traveling, it doesn't really fit in well with having a home and kids and stuff like that. So those things never happen. So it wasn't so much a decision as just the choice of traveling all the time.
Right.
Sort of caused it.
Right.
Yeah. But, since I'm a man, I don't have to be as careful about this sort of thing. Like I could still settle down and have kids if I want.
So how about
if I was a woman, I'd be well past that. But as a man, you have a little bit more freedom. I think for a woman who wanted to do a lot of traveling in her life, she might be better off to like have her kids early, and then once they're old enough that they're kind of independent, then she could do more traveling. Whereas for a man, I can stretch out all this extensive travel, and I could still have kids if I wanted to.
Right. How about in Canada? What is like the society there? Do they kind of like pressure you to settle as well? Because in Asia, in South America, or in Arab countries, when people do this thing, people would kind of look at you like, oh, this is not a normal behavior, and people define success here in Asia or in other parts of the world as having a family, settling down, having a stable job. So how about in Canada? Is it different out there?
I think that there probably would have been pressure for me to settle down and have kids and all that, except for my mother has 3 sons, and I'm the middle son. And the older son and the younger son both got married and had kids and live in a home and have a career. So this gives me a lot of cover. Like imagine if you're a mother who has three sons and two of them do the normal thing, then the one in the middle can do what he wants.
Right, right.
So
I agree.
yeah.
That's an advantage on your part as well, having that kind of setup.
Mm.
But
I
then,
think if I was the only son, then I would have felt much more social pressure that I should do something more normal.
right. So, what is it about travel that you really pursue this full time? Like we all know that travel is fun, is a fun activity, and you get to see places. But did you find something deeper in travel that you decided to do this nonstop since 1990?
Well, I find it intellectually stimulating. So I'm constantly learning new things, and the people I meet give me all this inside information as well, because it's almost like being a journalist, except people are even more open than if I was a journalist. It could be like I'm some sort of alien, like exploring the planet in a sense. And I meet all these people who are quite willing to tell me, their secret knowledge or inside knowledge they've gained about things. Like for instance, here in Ukraine, I had friends who knew about what Hunter Biden was up to, and I had another friend who's friends with the prosecutor who was looking into the case. So I knew like a year before anyone else did that Hunter Biden was involved in corruption in Ukraine. And there was the Democrat Party operatives here who were trying to cover it up. And then why it didn't really, I even know why the story didn't have legs, like you could say, like why it wasn't more of an issue that he was involved in this corruption where he received hundreds of thousands of dollars for no real work. And the reason was, according to the prosecutor, but he's just talking over beers, but he's saying that the reason was there were other important sons from other important political families in America on both sides of the aisle, so Republicans and Democrats, who were doing it. So it'd be too damaging to the other people in the House, so they don't really want to pursue that. So this kind of scandal, I was aware of before. And almost all the things that happen in the news, like I'm aware of it before it comes to the news. Like in Afghanistan, I was talking to aid workers there who were telling me that the U.S. military was allowing people who were associated with Karzai to grow and process $1 billion worth of opium a year, because they thought that would, keep the market, have some of the market for illegal opium then flowing to the people who are on the government side. Whereas if they tried to shut it down and didn't allow opium growing near the American bases in the like government controlled areas, then the Taliban would have an extra $1 billion. So, I heard that from like senior American officials and aid workers, maybe a year before, that came out in the news. So it's like I have like early warnings of everything that's going on. Like even for the caravans of people trying to cross into the United States now from the southern border. So I knew about that several years ago that was going to happen. From, I have some friends who are involved in refugee organizations and things like that. So I get to know in advance what's going on. So that's quite fun. And some things that happen, never make it to the news. There's some aspects of it, severe corruption that, never actually gets to the news because, no reporter would dare to report on it. And I get to know all of these things too. So even just from a geopolitical point of view, I get all this knowledge. And then from a sociological point of view, I learn about all these interesting civilizations and different ways of thinking. And often when there's something strange on the news and people say, oh, I don't understand. Why did the people there do that? Or why was the reaction for, when there was the UN tried to do this, the reaction was this, which was, seemed to counter what they thought it would be. I know the background story of it. So, I just have a very good understanding now of how the world works.
Right. And when you travel as well, it's funny because usually what you see, what's your perception of the particular place or particular country on the media is actually very different if you actually go to that particular country. That's what I experience as well. What the media portrays sometimes is just a facade or just a small part of what's really happening. It's a
Yeah. I mean,
very
the problem with the media is these are people who are not travelers. They're not used to talking to normal people. And they're told, like, they might hear, okay, there's a problem with Rohingya in Burma. Try to go over there and get a story. And they would try to go there, but they're not used to talking to people who aren't, university educated from their own country. So they don't really have a connection there. And they're going for such a short time. They try to fly in to a nearby country and they spend a couple of weeks. They don't really know anything or learn anything. And then they make a story and it's usually missing the point, or sometimes it's even completely wrong. And they
Right.
just go back, and at that time, their editor says, "Okay, now there's an earthquake in Haiti. Go report on that." And they arrive in Haiti. They don't know anyone there. They didn't spend any time there. They're supposed to report on the earthquake. They get it mostly wrong, and then they leave and do the next thing. So these news media, if you're watching this cable news, I don't think it's very good. I
Right.
don't think you get a good view of the world from this.
Right. Right.
It's just
That.
impossible with the way they handle it. It's just impossible. You can't have someone who's a talking head just flying around and going for a very short time to all these disasters or occurrences and then trying to make intelligent commentary on it.
True. So how was it like traveling in the 90s when there was no internet yet, no smartphones? Was it really difficult, booking tickets, booking flights, reserving hotels? How did you manage to
I
do
wouldn't
this
do
without
any
the
of that.
internet?
So yeah, I know. I would never reserve hotels, or I would just arrive and try to find a place. Because if you're reserving things, I found out that there was so much disruption to, like, you never know exactly when you're going to arrive. There could be problems, like maybe your bus blows a tire 8 times in a row. So you never know when you're really going to get somewhere. So it's better just not to reserve anything. And so I would just arrive and just look around. And I found, like, in all those years of travel, I never had a situation, or there's actually a couple times, but it's very rare that I'd have a situation where I arrive and I look and I find a hotel, and I'd ask them, and sometimes they'd say we don't have room. But then I would say, can you recommend a place that might have room? And usually, if I went to that place, there's almost like an 80% chance they would have room. And if I went there and they said I don't have room, then I have another place which would also be 80%. So I almost never had a situation like that Brisbane one where I had to sleep in the airport. There's always something, and sometimes I just end up, I come into a place, it turns out there's no hotels. So, I would just find like a mud hut run by some kind of tribeswoman and just say, can I sleep in this hut? She'd go, yeah, for $1. And I say, what do you have to eat? And she'd like have like a handful of fish she caught in the swamp, and you cook them over the campfire, and then you eat some cassava root and you go to bed. You hope the mosquitoes don't give you too much malaria. So yeah,
So,
it's easy. I wouldn't bother with any of this planning. And I had trouble recently when I was traveling in Turkey with a woman from Russia, and she was like, "I want you to book. I want you to book all the hotels in advance." And I was saying, "Well, why do you want this? I mean, it's unnecessary. Like, for instance, we're going to a bunch of islands where there's a lot of hotels there. And she wants me to book one in advance." And I said, this booking in advance is not a good idea, because you don't know really what you're getting. Even if you see it on the internet, you're not really aware if it's the best place. And if you just go there and walk around, you can go, oh, that hotel looks nice, and just go ask. And it's so rare that you can't find a place to sleep. I'm not really in favor of booking in advance.
so how about your
And for
flights?
traveling without internet, I mean, it made it more fun. Like, you really felt like you were like some of these older explorers where, sometimes like a month would go by and I didn't communicate with anyone because there's no internet, there's no nothing. And what was on the internet was mostly garbage back then anyway. There wasn't any real information. And the more you research something on the internet, often the less you knew about it, because there's all this there's poor quality information. There's no way to confirm it. I mean, it's different now. The internet's very useful, but it didn't used to be so useful back then. And you'd even talk to people who are coming out of a country, and even they didn't know much about it. Like, it really was going into the unknown for traveling then.
Yeah,
But it's so cheap too, though. So
yeah, I feel that that is an advantage in a way because you're able to experience the place more and you have this excitement of exploring the unknown. And once you're there, you're really able to savor your time there, the moment, the country, because you're not distracted by the internet or your smartphone. I think one of the biggest disadvantage of having this technology nowadays is kind of like a disadvantage and an advantage. But for the disadvantage is you go to this place and you're always so busy with your smartphone, at least most people, with social media, busy posting pictures, editing pictures. Because I remember I traveled before I had a smartphone. This was very recent, like 10 years ago, 2011. I traveled to Cambodia
hmm.
without a smartphone. So I remember if I want to access the internet, I would go to an internet cafe and
Yeah, I
update my
remember those. Yeah.
friends those days. And after that, after an hour at the internet cafe, then I'll be back and be actually in the moment, be in Cambodia right there. And
Hmm.
I remember those days. Comparing it now, I kind of miss those days where I'm not tied up to my phone.
Yeah. Well, I actually wrote about one experience I had in Jordan. where I went to see Petra, which is really worth seeing. There's this ancient ruin by I forget what was the name of the people who made it, but they were around during the time of Romans and Greeks and some of the early Arabic civilization. They're quite an ancient civilization.
Of
I think they might have
Jordan?
been called something like the Nabatulians or some name like
In
that.
Jordan?
But anyhow, it's like this is Petra in Jordan. So they
Yeah,
have that facade that's quite famous as well.
right.
It's really fun to see. So I went there and I checked into a hostel. This was in 2003, and I was looking at it. And there's one cave where they have a painting that's still intact. So they used to plaster their walls and paint them. And it showed people drinking wine, playing musical instruments, and talking. And I thought, oh, kind of cool. And then when I went back to the hostel, there was some people there with guitars, and they were drinking wine and talking. And I said, wow, this, from 2,000 years ago to today, people are still like enjoying the same kind of socialization. They're talking, they're playing music, they're drinking wine. And I said, wow, the culture hasn't changed in 2,000 years. But then when I went back again, I think in 2012, I was staying in the same hostel.
Hmm.
And I thought, oh, wow, the hostel where the culture is the same as 2,000 years ago. And I looked around and I go, oh, no, it's completely changed. So no one was playing any guitar. No one was talking. No one was drinking wine. They were all just looking at their smartphones.
Smartphone. Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah,
just
so
and
yeah, it's a big change.
big change. And when you were traveling back then, you didn't even have a camera. Why is that?
I felt that it was just more risk than it was worth. So if you're carrying a camera, it's quite obvious you're a tourist. And I knew from the people who were carrying cameras that they had a lot of trouble. And I even tried, like in Central Africa. I was with a friend who was a photographer, and he's telling me about all the terrible time he's having with being arrested. And I go, oh, okay, interesting. And he said, here, we'll try it. I'm going to put a camera around my neck so it's hanging by my chest, and we're going to try to walk down by the river to have coffee. And in the walk down to the river, we were arrested 5 times by different branches of police, and they all wanted money. So, there's certain countries that tourists don't go to where if you have a camera, then at the time it made you look like a journalist, and then they want to harass you.
Did you have any
So,
regrets
and
though of not bringing a camera of documenting those memories?
no, not really, because quite often I'd meet people who had cameras, and they would show me that they'd taken pictures of the same things that I saw, and often when I was there anyway, so they were taking the risk of arrest, and I was just walking along. And then afterward, I'd say, when you develop your pictures, like, can you just make an extra roll, and here's some money for it? And I go, okay, sure. So I've got a whole box full of photos of various countries. So probably half the countries or even more that I've been in, I've got photos from someone. But there are some countries where, I was the only one there, in which case I didn't get photos.
Mm.
But, I'm more interested in the stories anyway. I think that the photos maybe won't be so important in the future. And especially the camera quality back then wasn't what it is now. Like if you're traveling around now with quite a good smartphone, you're getting excellent quality photos. But, even what you were getting off an actual camera back then was often quite poor quality. I'm not sure how useful they were. Like I look back at my photos now from Africa in my first time to Africa, which would have been probably mid 90s. And they're not that good photos. I mean, the animals that looked really close up actually in the photo, you can hardly see them. There's a few that turned out, but there's not a lot.
Yeah, and I think not having a camera allows you to really experience the place, to be present as well, because like a smartphone, a camera for some people is also a distraction because you're so engaged in having the perfect shot, and instead of just being in the moment, and instead of witnessing the view or the place with your bare eyes, you are so you're so engrossed with the looking at it through the viewfinder. So not having a camera has its advantage as well, like what I've said, being able to really experience the place more, and it will really stick in your memory. And
Mm-hmm.
the memories are within us. It's not really on our photos. It's within us. And these wonderful memories are but fleeting. You experience
Mm-hmm.
them and they're gone, but they stay with you. It's not like you cannot preserve any memories, to be honest. It's just within you. You
Yeah.
cannot really preserve them through buying souvenirs or through having these wonderful photos or videos. It actually stays within you. So not having a camera before, I thought it's a big thing, or it's a big deal not having a camera, but now I realize that there's an advantage to it as well, because like what I've said, our memories are within us anyway.
And you tend to remember stories too. Like there's a narrative that if there's an interesting story, you remember the story. And you can't really capture the story on a camera unless you were like almost like a filmmaker. You were capturing everything and you were editing, and you could make a visual story. But in most cases, the interesting things can't be caught on camera.
Yeah,
Now this might
exactly.
change with technology. There's new things coming out where they have like sunglasses where it's actually recording. Now, once that, like say 10 years from now, maybe that will be very advanced, and perhaps you can record your entire day on your sunglasses and upload it to the cloud. In which case, you could edit your own life, and you could try to tell the story through pictures. But that's
Yeah,
that's a different thing entirely.
yeah, there was actually that came out before, but now it's not very popular anymore. Google Glass, I've heard about Google Glass. They had it back
Yeah,
then, but now it's for some reason it's not popular nowadays. Yeah, but then even with that, with these technologies, it's still quite impossible to really capture the stories in between the moments, like the feeling that you felt during that time. Like what I've said,
hmm,
traveling, you can only capture so much because the experience that we have are fleeting. The experience
yeah,
it at the moment, and that's about it. It's just basically
yeah.
living in the moment. And I
Yeah,
think
but
with
there is one way to capture them, and I would do this. It was a little bit annoying to me because I had to carry around notebooks. But I would carry around notebooks, and I would send them back to Canada every so often. When they got filled up. And when I wrote a book about my travel experience, I was so glad I had these notebooks because I was remembering stories, but I had all the details in the notebook. So if an interesting thing happened to me, I would write down the details of what happened and sort of make it a little mini story. And I had like maybe 40, 50 of these notebooks with all descriptions of stories. And it really helped for me to remember what my thoughts had been at the moment when things had happened.
right, I think that's even a better way of documenting it because your thoughts are actively participating. It's not like, okay, I captured this through a video and that's about it. I'm gonna sleep. But if you write them through a journal, through your notebook, then your mind is actively reminiscing what happened and you're emotionally
Mhm.
involved in that as well.
Yeah, and also one of the best things of travel is when you meet some people and you're just having fun and they're telling some jokes or they tell some stories and these stories are very interesting or the jokes are very funny. And if you have a notebook, sometimes you can write them down. Or if a funny
Right.
thing happens to you, that it's not really visual what happens, but just a really funny coincidence, you can write it down and then enjoy it later. So yeah, I really like the notebook idea. Even now that I have a phone, I bought one a couple of years ago. Even now, I use the note feature of it as well. So occasionally I'll write down some interesting story that what went on.
Yeah, it's very similar to reading a book as compared to watching a movie. I find like most people find reading a book more engaging and more comprehensive. So that's similar to journaling. It's like reading a book, the details are there.
Yeah. Well, yeah. As a result of that, I definitely recommend the notebook. You can just even get a small notebook and just or use the one on your phone or just carry one in whatever your travel bag is. Yeah, it's really great because the little amusing things that happen and coincidences they're so much fun. Like I remember once, like I was trying to go from Kathmandu I was trying to get out of Kathmandu to go to India, and I just finished doing 3 weeks of trekking in the mountains. And I had a friend with me who was like, he's actually half Cree native and half Ukrainian, but he was living in Canada. And he already had a visa for India. So he just took off and he said, I'll meet you later in India. How about we'll just meet in Goa and go from there? I'm like, okay, cool. I'll see you in Goa. But I didn't have a visa. So I had to go try to get one. And it's a bit of a problem because Maoist guerrillas were besieging Kathmandu. So a lot of people were trying to get out. So I had to pay $100 bribe to the guy at the Indian embassy. And as a result, I got a visa. But it's a few days delay. And so I was trying to get out to see my friend like a few days after he'd already arrived in India. So I check an internet cafe. There's no information as to where he went. I thought, okay, I'll just fly to Goa. So then I get on. Then I had a bunch of bad luck, actually. So I went into the airport in Kathmandu, and it turned out it was a really dirty airport. And I had to use the toilet, and it was like really, really bad, almost like a bus station toilet you'd see in like Lithuania in 1992, like that kind of thing. Really, really bad. And then I was flying through Delhi, and they wouldn't let me go into India at that point. Instead, I was in like a holding room where I hadn't really done my papers yet. And I was like, well, how long do I have to wait here? And they said 5 hour wait. There was like nothing to do. So I just sat up against the wall of the room and I'm just kind of staring and I'm just going to sit there for 5 hours. But then I saw there was two vending machines And in one of them, there was an English language magazine called Scientific American, which at that time often had interesting articles. And I thought, oh, okay, I could read that. So then I went over and I noticed I didn't have the correct change to use the vending machine. And I thought, oh, okay, annoying. So I went back and waited for another half an hour just sitting there. And then I saw a guy come in and he set up a little table and he put out this sign that said, I'm here to give change for people who want to use the vending machine. And I thought, oh, great, okay. So I go over there and I say, oh, I'm so glad you're here. I need some change. And he goes, okay, yeah, I'll make change, show me what bills you have. And I start to get out the bills, but then he noticed where my eye was looking. I was looking toward the English language magazine instead of the Hindi language one. And he goes, oh, no, mister, I see you are trying to use the vending machine on the right instead of the one on the left. And so he wouldn't give me change because he was only there to assist with people that were using his vending machine, not the other vending machine.
Yeah.
So he wouldn't even make a change for my bill.
Whoa.
So I thought, oh no. So I ended up having to just go and sit against the wall and wait for another 5 hours. So just annoying, but it's kind of funny. And then I was getting on I was going to get on the plane and they were looking through my stuff. And just at this point, they were making a changeover where they didn't allow lighters. And I had a lighter that I just carried if someone asked me, do you have a light? I don't actually smoke. Or I used it sometimes for setting campfires. But they saw I had this lighter and they go, oh, new rule, no lighters allowed. And he's like, threw it into the garbage. And I go, oh no, I had this lighter for like 11 years. So anyway, sort of annoying. But then I flew to Goa and got out and there was I checked again at an internet cafe, no information from my friend. And thought, okay, well, I don't even know. Goa is a fairly big place. There's a lot of beaches, a lot of hotels. It probably goes for 100 kilometers or 200. I'm not sure exactly how much, but it's pretty big. And I thought, no information. Okay, well, I'll just kind of guess. So I just got on a bus that was going along the coast, and it was quite crowded, and I was pretty tired. And eventually I just got out at one beach, just picked at random. And then some guy, I checked again at an internet cafe, again, no information. And then a boy came up to me and said, do you want to get a hotel for $8 a night? And I go, yeah, okay. So I went to this hotel, checked in. And then when I got up in the morning, I heard guitar playing from the room next to me. And it turned out it was my friend that I'd seen in Kathmandu. So he just randomly was in exactly the room next to me with a balcony right beside mine. So it's just little things like that, like strange coincidences. And things that I remember, like things that I wouldn't have remembered unless I wrote it down in notes. Because those sort of details, you won't be able to capture that with a camera. Those kind of stories just stacked one on top of another. And years or decades would go by with nonstop activity like that.
And now we are in this 21st century. The technology is becoming popular with vlogs, smartphones. Do you have plans to adapt? Probably start a blog, write more on your website, something like that, or you just prefer to just travel and experience it through your own without sharing much to the world?
I think if anything, I'm probably doing less sharing now because, I've finished the trip. I finished doing a lot of media stuff. I found there's actually, I could have made money, I guess, from, media exposure. So I had a lot of offers where I could do speeches and I did a few of them and they were paying quite well, like $500 a speech. Mm-hmm. But then I thought it's just kind of, I'm interested in travel. I'm not interested in going around to various small cities and getting in a motel and then going out to a site and giving a speech and collecting $500 and then going in doing it again. That wasn't my interest. My interest was travel. So I thought, okay, enough of this. So I just got back to just backpacking around. So I stopped for a couple of months, at the end of my trip to do media stuff, but no, it's not for me.
What are some of the lessons that you've learned in your 30 years of traveling nonstop that you can share to the world?
Okay, well, I guess one of the things is one I already touched on, that if you're just watching the cable news or news people in general, they don't know anything. So if you really want to find out what's going on, you have to go there in person. And you can't just talk to the important people or the official people. You have to talk to everyone, just go down to the communities. And just, it's not like you're trying to find out, just that you'll learn. So if you're living, amongst the people instead of in some, overly touristic spot, and you're just meeting people and talking to people and letting life naturally progress, you'll learn really what it's like in different societies in different parts of the world. And I just feel it's so enriching. So it's the kind of thing you can't get you can't even get it off looking at things online and things. You really have to go out there and experience it. People are so complicated, and they have so much interesting things to say. So even someone who's maybe not well educated, they are well educated of how they have to live where they're living. So even the least educated person can be worth talking to. And I think that's one of the lessons of it. And also, we have such a big planet, and there's so many interesting things to see. It takes almost an entire lifetime to go and view it. So I recommend travel for everyone.
So, what is your message for those who want to travel full time as well and as extreme as what you did to travel to every country in the world and do it full time? Any message?
Okay, I think for that, I think the best thing there is your main danger is people who are trying to deceive you and perhaps even rob or kill you. And the way to avoid that is when you are doing things in day-to-day life, like let's say you're buying something at the market, pay close attention to the looks on people's faces if they are ripping you off, because quite often you get ripped off. Like someone will overcharge you for mangoes or something. They're charging you 10 times what it should be. And this is a good learning experience. Pay attention to that. You'll see certain looks on their face. And eventually what you'll get is a feel for who's honest and who's dishonest. And then this is what saves you for doing out of the way or even dangerous countries, because you'll encounter various people and they're making offers for you. Like you might be talking to several people and they're offering that you can ride on the back of their motorcycle. They'll take you to the next town. Now you have to be a very good judge of character. So you're looking, as you're speaking with them, you're looking at their faces, or even if you can't speak their language and you're trying to communicate only in the most crude possible way, that's even better, because then you're not paying attention to words. You're looking more at the face of the person. And you can tell from the face if it's a good person or a bad person. And you have to get very good at this. So when you're being ripped off in a market, it's a good opportunity to train yourself. And then eventually you'll become good at it. And if you just go with the people who are not the nasty people, you'll find out that you can go through even the most dangerous places without trouble.
And how do you feel that you're able to visit every country in the world? Any travel plans in the future since you've been to all of these places?
I'm just going with, so now I'm sort of more interested in traveling with friends. So I meet certain friends that I know from before. And if they suggest a country, I kind of go with them to that country. And then the fact that they're excited to be there makes me a little bit more excited. It's almost like what some people that have kids say, where they're like, because they have a little kid growing up, and the kid's doing something for the first time, they get a little bit of a thrill out of it, even if maybe they're already bored of that. So it's the same thing with me. I can enjoy even countries I've been to many times. If I go there with someone who's been coming there for the first time, I can vicariously enjoy the country through them to a level that's approaching, what it used to be for me. Because now, whatever country it is, I've usually been there quite a lot. I did a very thorough visiting of each country on Earth. So if I'm going there with friends, I get a better experience. I don't think I would try to solo these countries again, because that would be then just repeating something I've already done.
All right, great. Thank you once again for being on the podcast. So how can people find you, or those who want to buy your book? You've written a book.
I guess online. I'm not sure how available my book is now, but it might be the usual things like Amazon and things like that. It might still be available. I'm not sure if they probably sold them out a long time ago, but probably the digital version's available, and there might be used ones available, which is maybe a better deal for someone who's thinking of buying it. And other than that, if you look me up online, I'm there. I respond to people's questions on my website as much as I can. So yeah, I'm pretty easy to get in touch with. Yeah, and it's been great fun. Yeah, it was a really good conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mike, and I hope to see you on the road someday as well.
Ooh, okay. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you guys for tuning in. And for a travel quote, travel interests me, not as a perpetual form of self-sustenance, but for the philosophical gains and pure joy of such a life. From Mike Spencer Bown. Once again, this has been your host, Regin, till the next episode.